Raymund Ruiz never imagined that pulling a stranger from an avalanche would lead to an offer that would change his family's life forever. Standing in the pristine boardroom of Silverpeak Resort 3 days later, watching his 8-year-old daughter Camila stare in wonder at the panoramic mountain views, he realized that sometimes the most extraordinary opportunities come disguised as the most terrifying moments of your life. But what if the woman whose life he saved was hiding a secret that could either fulfill his daughter's impossible dreams or destroy the fragile hope they were just beginning to build? Before we dive into this incredible story of courage, family, and second chances, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if stories about ordinary heroes inspire you, make sure you hit that subscribe button because tomorrow I have something absolutely extraordinary planned that will leave you speechless. The blizzard that changed everything began on a Thursday morning in the mountain town of Winter Haven, Colorado. Raymond stood at the window of their cramped studio apartment above Martinez Bakery, watching the snow fall in thick, angry sheets that promised another day of canceled construction work. The weather forecast had been calling for this storm all week, and every canceled day meant another day without pay, another day closer to the impossible choice between keeping the heat on or buying Camila's asthma medication. "Daddy, is it a snow day?" Camila's voice carried the hopeful excitement of a child who still believed that unexpected changes might bring magic instead of worry. She sat at their small kitchen table, carefully coloring a picture of mountains and ski lifts, her dark hair falling in waves around her face as she concentrated on staying inside the lines. "Looks like it, mija," Raymond said, forcing brightness into his voice as he turned away from the window. At 32, he'd learned to hide his fears behind smiles, to transform his anxiety into adventures for his daughter's sake. The eviction notice tucked behind the coffee maker remained invisible to Camila's 8-year-old eyes, and Raymond intended to keep it that way. Their morning routine had become a carefully choreographed dance of making little feel like enough. Instant oatmeal became mountain climber breakfast, and their view of the distant Silverpeak Resort became our daily mountain adventure from the window. Camila had been fascinated by the famous ski resort since they'd moved to Winter Haven 6 months ago, pressing her nose against the glass to watch the tiny figures skiing down slopes that looked like white ribbons from their second-story perch. "Can we go sledding today?" she asked, adding purple to what appeared to be a very ambitious ski lodge in her drawing. "Mrs. Hernandez said the hill behind the school is perfect when it snows like this." Raymond smiled, remembering his own childhood in New Mexico, before the divorce, before his ex-wife decided that a struggling construction worker wasn't the kind of father she wanted for their daughter. "After the storm passes, we'll see what we can do." The truth was more complicated. Raymond worked 3 different construction jobs when the weather allowed, trying to piece together enough income to keep them housed and fed in a mountain town where everything cost twice what it did in the valley. Their sledding options were limited to cardboard boxes and careful supervision on the smallest hills, but Camila's imagination transformed every modest adventure into something magical. His phone buzzed with a text from his crew chief: "Storm's too dangerous. No work today. Stay safe." Raymond closed his eyes briefly, calculating the cost of another lost day. The math was unforgiving, as it always was. But when he opened his eyes and saw Camila humming softly as she worked on her drawing, he reminded himself that they had what mattered most: each other, a roof over their heads for now, and his daughter's unwavering faith that her daddy could handle anything. "You know what?" Raymond said, settling into the chair beside her. "Why don't we work on that puzzle we started yesterday, the one with the mountain rescue dogs?" Camila's face lit up with the kind of pure joy that made every sacrifice worthwhile. "The one where they save people in the snow. Can you tell me again about how they find people buried in avalanches?" Raymond had learned everything he could about mountain rescue after they'd moved to Winter Haven, partly from curiosity and partly because Camila's questions were endless and detailed. She was fascinated by heroes who saved people from dangerous situations, and he'd made it his mission to have answers for her boundless curiosity. "Well," he began, pulling out the half-finished puzzle, "Avalanche rescue dogs are trained to smell people buried under the snow. they can find someone buried 10 feet deep even in a blizzard. As they worked on the puzzle together, Raymond had no idea that in less than 4 hours he would be the one pulling someone from an avalanche. He couldn't imagine that his knowledge of mountain rescue, gathered to answer his daughter's questions, would save a life. And he certainly couldn't foresee that the woman he would rescue would turn out to be Madeline Smith, the reclusive billionaire owner of Silverpeak Resort, who had been searching for someone exactly like him for reasons he wouldn't understand until it was almost too late. The puzzle piece Camila placed showed a rescue dog digging through snow, its determined expression captured in perfect detail. Neither of them knew that by sunset, Raymond would understand exactly what that kind of determination looked like in real life, or that this snowy Thursday would become the day that changed everything they thought they knew about second chances, impossible dreams, and the extraordinary things that can happen when an ordinary father becomes an unexpected hero. Outside their window, the storm continued to build, setting the stage for a rescue that would transform not just one life, but an entire family's future in ways that seemed as impossible as the mountains themselves. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The reality of Raymund Ruiz's life hit hardest in the quiet moments between storms, when the mountain town of Winter Haven settled into an expensive silence that he couldn't afford to be part of. While Camila napped that Thursday afternoon, her breathing slightly labored from the asthma that worsened with stress and cold, Raymund sat at their tiny kitchen table with a calculator, 3 overdue bills, and the kind of desperation that came from loving someone more than life itself while watching your ability to provide for them slip away like snow in the spring thaw. The eviction notice behind the coffee maker wasn't the only paper he'd been hiding from his daughter. There was the letter from Camila's school about the unpaid lunch fees, the notice from the clinic about her missed asthma checkup, and the estimates for winter clothes that might as well have been written in a foreign language for all the sense the numbers made to his budget. Raymund had been a proud man once, the kind who'd never imagined asking for help. That was before he learned that love could make you humble faster than any other force on earth. His phone showed 17 missed calls from his ex-wife, Patricia. She'd remarried last year, a dental surgeon from Denver who owned a house with heated floors and a 3-car garage. Patricia had been making noises about Camila's living situation, questioning whether a man who couldn't afford basic health care for his daughter should have primary custody. The calls had become more frequent as the holidays approached, each one a reminder that his precarious grip on stability was visible to everyone, including family court judges. "We could give her everything she needs," Patricia had said during their last conversation. "Private schools, the best doctors, ski lessons at Silverpeak Resort. She wouldn't have to worry about whether the heat will be turned off or if there's enough food in the refrigerator." The worst part was that Patricia wasn't wrong. Camila deserved heated floors and ski lessons and doctors who didn't require payment plans. She deserved a father who could say yes when she asked for things, instead of turning every request into a creative alternative. But she also deserved to be loved unconditionally, to be someone's whole world rather than an accessory to someone else's perfect life. And Raymund would fight anyone, including family court, to ensure she never doubted which she was to him. The construction industry in Winter Haven was feast or famine, dependent on weather that seemed increasingly determined to keep him in the famine category. Summer months brought steady work building vacation homes for wealthy Denver families who wanted mountain retreats. Winter brought sporadic snow removal jobs and long stretches of unemployment that tested every survival skill he'd learned growing up poor in Albuquerque. Raymund's toolkit told the story of a man making do with less. Duct tape holding together equipment that should have been replaced years ago. A pickup truck with 200,000 miles that he maintained himself because mechanics were a luxury he couldn't afford. But his hands were steady and his work was solid, and the contractors who hired him knew they could count on him to show up early, work late, and never complain about conditions that sent other workers home. The real challenge wasn't the physical demands of construction work or even the financial uncertainty. The real challenge was watching Camila adapt to their circumstances with the resilience of a child who'd learned too young that life could change without warning. She never asked for things she saw other kids have. She never complained about their tiny apartment or their secondhand clothes, or the fact that her asthma inhaler was generic because name-brand medications were beyond their reach. Instead, she drew pictures of mountain adventures and talked about becoming a rescue worker who saved people from avalanches. She collected smooth stones from the creek behind their building and arranged them into patterns that she called meditation gardens for people who need to feel calm. At 8 years old, Camila had developed an emotional intelligence that both amazed and broke Raymond's heart, because he knew that came from having to understand adult problems before she should have needed to. The afternoon light was fading when Camila woke from her nap, her dark eyes bright with the kind of energy that made their cramped apartment feel like the center of the universe. She padded to the window in her stocking feet, pressing her nose against the glass to watch the snow continue its relentless fall. "Daddy, look how deep it's getting," she said, her breath fogging the window. "Do you think people might get stuck up on the mountain?" Raymond joined her at the window, wrapping his arms around her small frame and breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, the one luxury he refused to compromise on because it made her smile every morning. The storm was intensifying, turning the distant slopes of Silverpeak Resort into a white blur that seemed to exist in another world entirely. "Maybe," he said carefully, "but the resort has professional rescue teams for situations like this. They know how to keep people safe." Camila leaned against him with the complete trust of a child who believed her father could handle anything the world threw at them. "Would you help if someone needed rescuing, even if it was dangerous?" The question hung in the air like a prophecy, though neither of them knew it yet. Raymond thought about the mountain rescue knowledge he'd accumulated to answer her endless questions, about the first aid certification he'd earned when she was diagnosed with asthma, about the kind of man he wanted to be for his daughter even when everything else felt like it was falling apart. "I'd help," he said simply. "That's what people do for each other." As the storm continued to build outside their window, Raymond had no way of knowing that in less than 2 hours, those words would be put to the ultimate test. He couldn't foresee that his willingness to help would lead him into a blizzard that would change their lives forever, or that the woman he was about to save would see in him exactly what he'd been hoping to prove to himself, that being a good father had nothing to do with the size of your bank account and everything to do with the size of your heart. The emergency alert pierced through the mountain silence at 4:17 p.m., its shrill tone cutting across every radio frequency in Winter Haven like a blade through fresh snow. Raymond was washing their lunch dishes when the broadcast crackled to life from their ancient radio, the announcer's voice tight with urgency. "This is Winter Haven Emergency Services. We have reports of multiple avalanches in the Silverpeak Resort area. All emergency personnel are requested to respond immediately. Civilian access to the mountain is restricted until further notice." Camila looked up from her coloring book, her crayon frozen mid-stroke as she registered the tension in her father's posture. She'd learned to read his moods like weather patterns, understanding that certain kinds of stillness meant danger, even when she couldn't see the storm clouds gathering. "What's an avalanche alert, Daddy?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew it wasn't something good. Raymond dried his hands slowly, his mind automatically cataloging the rescue information he'd absorbed over the months of answering Camila's questions. Avalanche victims had approximately 15 minutes before asphyxiation became the primary threat. Every second after burial reduced survival chances exponentially. The golden rule of avalanche rescue wasn't sophisticated equipment or professional training. It was being in the right place at the right time with the courage to act. "It means there's been a snowslide up on the mountain," he explained, keeping his voice steady. "Sometimes when there's too much new snow on old ice, it can all come down at once." Through their window, the storm showed no signs of relenting. If anything, the wind had picked up, creating the kind of horizontal snow that turned familiar landscapes into alien territory. Raymund could barely make out the access road that wound up toward Silverpeak Resort, though he'd driven it dozens of times while working construction on vacation homes scattered throughout the area. The radio crackled again, this time with multiple voices overlapping in controlled chaos. Search and rescue coordinators calling for additional teams, medical personnel requesting helicopter transport that wouldn't be possible in current weather conditions. The systematic efficiency of professionals responding to a crisis that was unfolding in real time. Raymond's phone rang, startling them both. The caller ID showed Dave Martinez, his neighbor downstairs who worked maintenance at Silverpeak Resort and had become something like family over the past 6 months. "Ray, you there?" Dave's voice was strained, competing with wind noise that suggested he was outside in the storm. "I'm here. You okay?" "I'm at the resort. Listen, man, we've got a situation. The avalanche hit the east slope about 20 minutes ago. Professional search and rescue can't get up here. Roads are completely impassable, and the weather's too bad for helicopters. But we think there might be someone still up there." Raymund felt his chest tighten. "What do you mean, someone still up there?" "Resort guest went out for a backcountry ski tour this morning before the storm got bad. Solo trip. She was supposed to check in by 3, but we haven't heard anything. Her GPS tracker went dark right around where the slide happened." The mathematics of the situation were brutal and simple. If someone was buried under that avalanche, they had minutes, not hours. Professional rescue teams were 40 minutes away in good weather, which they definitely didn't have. Helicopter rescue was impossible. That left whoever was already on the mountain, maintenance crews and anyone else desperate or crazy enough to venture out in conditions that were deteriorating by the minute. "Dave, I can't," Raymund started, looking at Camila, who was watching him with the intense attention of a child who understood that adult conversations sometimes carried life or death weight. "I know you've got Camila to think about," Dave interrupted quickly. "But Ray, you know this mountain better than anyone except the professionals. You've worked construction sites all over these slopes, and you've got that wilderness first aid certification." That was true. Raymund had earned the certification 2 years ago when Camila's asthma had gotten severe enough to require emergency medication. He'd wanted to be prepared for any situation where her life might depend on his ability to respond correctly and quickly. The training had been thorough: wilderness medicine, emergency stabilization, survival techniques for extreme weather conditions.
"Where exactly are you talking about?" Raymond asked, though part of him already knew he was going to say yes. There was something about the idea of someone buried alone under tons of snow that made every parental instinct in his body fire at once. "East Slope, about half a mile up from the old mining trail. I can get you to the base of the search area, but after that, you'd be on foot." "Ray, I wouldn't ask if there was any other option." Camila had abandoned her coloring entirely now, watching her father with the solemn expression she wore when she was trying to solve adult problems that shouldn't have been hers to worry about. "Daddy, is someone hurt on the mountain?" "Maybe, mija. Maybe." She nodded slowly, processing this information with the gravity of someone who'd learned that the world contained dangers that required brave people to face them. "Like the rescue dogs in our puzzle." "Like the rescue dogs," Raymond confirmed. The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of wind rattling their windows and the distant crackle of emergency radio traffic. Raymond thought about Patricia's phone calls, about custody battles and heated floors and ski lessons at Silverpeak Resort. He thought about what kind of father exposed his daughter to unnecessary risk, and what kind of father taught his daughter that some risks were worth taking. "Mrs. Hernandez could watch me," Camila said quietly. "She's always home, and she has hot chocolate." Raymond knelt down to his daughter's level, taking her small hands in his larger ones. They were warm and steady, these hands that trusted him to make the right choices, even when the choices were impossible. "Camila, this could be dangerous. I might be gone for several hours in very bad weather. But if you don't go, the person might die?" "Maybe." She considered this with the seriousness of someone who'd inherited her father's moral compass along with his dark eyes and stubborn determination. "Mama always said that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing anyway." The mention of his late mother hit Raymond like a physical blow. His mother had died when Camila was 4, but she'd managed to leave an impression on her granddaughter that had lasted through 4 years of bedtime stories and gentle lessons about kindness and courage. Abuela said that? She said that helping people is the most important job anyone can have, even more important than construction. Dave's voice crackled through the phone, which Raymond had forgotten he was still holding. "Ray, you still there? We're losing time." Raymond looked at his daughter, this 8-year-old who somehow understood that love sometimes meant letting the people you care about take risks for the people they didn't even know. He thought about the kind of man he wanted to be, not just for Camila, but for himself. "Dave, give me 5 minutes to get Camila settled with Mrs. Hernandez, then come get me." As he helped Camila pack her overnight bag with the efficient calm of someone who'd learned to handle emergencies, Raymond had no way of knowing that the person buried under tons of snow was Madeline Smith, the enigmatic billionaire who owned every slope, every trail, and every building he could see from his window. He couldn't imagine that his decision to risk everything for a stranger would lead to opportunities that seemed as impossible as surviving an avalanche itself. All he knew was that somewhere in the storm, someone was running out of time, and he was the only person in position to help. For a man who'd spent 2 years feeling like he couldn't provide what his daughter needed, it was a chance to prove that some things mattered more than money, and that sometimes being a hero was as simple as showing up when showing up was the hardest thing in the world. The rescue took 3 hours that felt like 3 days. By the time Raymond and Dave finally pulled the woman from under 8 feet of snow and debris, the storm had transformed the familiar slopes of Silverpeak Resort into an alien landscape where visibility dropped to arm's length and every breath felt like swallowing ice. The woman, unconscious, hypothermic, but miraculously breathing, had been equipped with an avalanche beacon that led them directly to her location. Without it, they never would have found her before the cold claimed what the snow hadn't. Raymond had worked construction in extreme weather, but nothing had prepared him for the physical demands of avalanche rescue. His shoulders screamed from hours of digging with emergency shovels. His hands, even inside insulated gloves, had lost feeling somewhere around the 2nd hour. But when they'd finally uncovered her face, pale as the snow around her, lips blue with cold but alive, he'd felt a surge of purpose that made every frozen muscle worth the pain. The woman stirred to consciousness during the careful trek down to the resort's medical facility, mumbling words that the wind stole before they could make sense. Dave had radioed ahead for medical support, and by the time they reached the base lodge, a full emergency response team was waiting with heated blankets, oxygen, and the kind of professional efficiency that made Raymond's improvised rescue efforts feel amateur by comparison. "You saved her life," the lead paramedic told him as they loaded her into an ambulance for transport to Valley General Hospital. "Another 20 minutes and hypothermia would have been irreversible. Good work." Raymond nodded, too exhausted to feel much beyond relief that it was over. His clothes were soaked through, despite his winter gear, and the adrenaline that had carried him through the rescue was fading fast, leaving him shaky and desperate to get home to Camila. Dave offered to drive him back to town, and they made the trip in comfortable silence, both of them processing what they'd just accomplished.
Mrs. Hernandez met them at the apartment building entrance with Camila bundled in her winter coat and an expression of barely contained excitement that suggested she'd been watching for them from her window for the past hour. "Daddy!" Camila launched herself into his arms with the force of someone who'd been holding back worry through sheer determination. "Mrs. Hernandez said you saved someone from an avalanche. Was it scary?" "A little," Raymond admitted, holding her close and breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. After hours in the freezing wilderness, she felt impossibly warm and solid and real. "But we got her out safely." "Is she going to be okay?" "The doctors think so." That had been Friday evening. Saturday passed quietly, with Raymond recovering from the physical demands of the rescue while Camila peppered him with questions about avalanche survival techniques that somehow always circled back to her fascination with mountain rescue operations. He'd expected the story to end there, a good deed done, a life saved, back to the ordinary struggles of making rent and keeping food on the table. Sunday morning changed everything. The knock on their door came at exactly 10 a.m., delivered by a woman in an expensive wool coat who looked like she'd stepped out of a business magazine. She was probably in her early 40s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a style that suggested boardrooms and important decisions, but her smile was warm and genuine when Raymund opened the door. "Mr. Ruiz, my name is Victoria Chen. I'm the Director of Operations for Silverpeak Resort. I was hoping I could speak with you about Friday evening." Raymund invited her in, suddenly aware of their small apartment's limitations in a way he hadn't been since they'd first moved in. Victoria's coat probably cost more than he made in a month, and her presence made their second-hand furniture and patched walls feel even more modest than usual. Camila emerged from her bedroom wearing her best dress, the purple one with small flowers that she'd chosen for the occasion after eavesdropping on enough of the conversation to understand that this was an important visitor. "You're very brave," Victoria told her seriously. "It takes courage to let your father go help someone in a dangerous situation." "Daddy says helping people is the most important job anyone can have," Camila replied with the solemn dignity of someone quoting sacred wisdom. Victoria's smile deepened. "He's absolutely right." She turned back to Raymund, her expression shifting to something more businesslike but no less warm. "Mr. Ruiz, the woman you rescued Friday night is Madeline Smith. She owns Silverpeak Resort." The name meant nothing to Raymund, though he caught something in Victoria's tone that suggested it should. Camilla's eyes widened with the dramatic appreciation of someone who understood that important people had important names, even if she didn't know why this particular name was significant. "She's been trying to reach you since she regained consciousness Saturday morning," Victoria continued. "She'd like to meet with you personally to express her gratitude. But more than that, she has a proposition that she believes might be of mutual benefit." Raymund felt a familiar wariness settle in his chest. In his experience, propositions from wealthy people usually involved them getting what they wanted while making the person receiving the proposition feel grateful for whatever scraps fell their way. "What kind of proposition?" Victoria pulled an envelope from her coat pocket, cream-colored paper that felt substantial and important in a way that bills and overdue notices never did. "Miss Smith would prefer to discuss the details in person, but I can tell you that she's looking for someone to head up a new position at the resort, someone with your particular combination of skills and character." "I'm a construction worker," Raymund said carefully. "I don't know anything about running a resort." "The position isn't about resort management," Victoria clarified. "It's about safety and emergency response. Miss Smith has been wanting to establish a comprehensive mountain safety program for some time, but she's been looking for the right person to lead it. Someone who understands the mountain, who has practical experience with emergency situations, and who has the kind of judgment that leads them to risk their own safety for strangers." She held out the envelope, which felt warm despite having been outside in the December cold. The salary would be $90,000 annually, plus full benefits, plus housing if you're interested. There's also an educational component that would include full college scholarships for family members. Raymund stared at the envelope as if it might explode in his hands. $90,000 was more money than he'd made in the past 3 years combined. College scholarships meant Camila could have the future she deserved without him having to choose between her education and basic necessities. "Why me?" he asked, echoing the same question he'd asked himself 100 times since Friday night. "You could hire someone with credentials, someone with professional rescue experience." Victoria's expression grew thoughtful. "Miss Smith has very specific ideas about the kind of person she wants for this position. Someone who acts on instinct and moral conviction rather than job descriptions. Someone who understands that the most important qualifications can't be learned in a classroom." She stood up, smoothing her coat with the practiced efficiency of someone who conducts important business as naturally as breathing. "The meeting is scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m. at the resort's main lodge. If you're interested, there'll be a car to pick you up at 1:30. After Victoria left, Raymund sat at their kitchen table, staring at the envelope that contained an address he'd only seen from a distance and an opportunity that seemed too extraordinary to be real. Camila climbed into his lap, her small hands tracing the elegant lettering on the envelope's surface. "Daddy, is this about your rescue?" "I think so, mija." "And she wants to give you a job because you saved her?" "Maybe." Camila considered this with the seriousness of someone working through complex moral equations. Mrs. Hernandez says that when you do good things, sometimes good things happen back to you, but not because you expect them to. As evening settled over Winter Haven and the lights of Silverpeak Resort twinkled in the distance like stars that had fallen to earth, Raymond found himself wondering if his daughter's 8-year-old wisdom might be the most sophisticated thing anyone had ever said about the mysterious mathematics of kindness and consequence. Tomorrow, he would meet the woman whose life he'd saved and learn whether some opportunities really were too good to be true, or if sometimes the universe rewarded people who were brave enough to help strangers in storms. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline mountain clarity that made the previous Friday storm seem like a distant memory. Raymond stood at their apartment window, watching the early shift workers make their way through Winter Haven's snow-packed streets, and tried to convince himself that Victoria Chen's visit hadn't been an elaborate dream brought on by rescue-related exhaustion. The envelope sat on their kitchen table like a small monument to possibility, its cream-colored elegance somehow managing to make everything else in their modest apartment look shabby by comparison. Camila had already left for school, but not before spending 20 minutes at breakfast asking increasingly sophisticated questions about job interviews, salary negotiations, and whether accepting help from someone you'd rescued counted as charity or opportunity. Mrs. Rodriguez says that when someone offers you a job, you should always ask lots of questions first, she'd announced over her cereal, apparently having consulted with her second-grade teacher about matters of professional development. She says that smart people investigate before they decide. Now, with 3 hours until the mysterious meeting at Silverpeak Resort, Raymond found himself taking his 8-year-old daughter's advice and conducting the kind of research he'd never thought to do for construction jobs that were straightforward exchanges of labor for modest paychecks. His first stop was the Winter Haven Public Library, a small building that served the entire mountain community with determination that far exceeded its resources. The librarian, Mrs. Foster, was a woman in her 60s who'd moved to the mountains from Denver after her retirement and treated information requests like personal missions. "Madeline Smith," she repeated, her fingers already flying across her computer keyboard. "Now that's an interesting research subject. Most people around here know the name, but not much about the person behind it." What Mrs. Foster uncovered over the next hour painted a picture of a woman whose life seemed to exist in carefully managed shadows. Madeline Smith had inherited Silverpeak Resort from her grandfather at age 28, transforming it from a modest family ski operation into one of Colorado's premier mountain destinations. She was 41 now, had never married, and appeared in public so rarely that recent photographs were virtually non-existent. "She's what you might call a benevolent recluse," Mrs. Foster explained, pulling up articles from local newspapers spanning the past decade. "The resort employs half the people in this valley, and she's known for paying well above industry standard, but she almost never gives interviews or makes public appearances." The financial information was even more intriguing. Silverpeak Resort wasn't just successful, it was phenomenally profitable, generating revenue that supported not just the immediate operation, but a network of community initiatives that most residents probably didn't even know existed. Scholarship programs for local students, healthcare subsidies for seasonal workers, infrastructure improvements throughout the valley that were quietly funded through shell companies traced back to Madeline Smith's various business entities. "She's been looking for someone to head up mountain safety for almost 2 years," Mrs. Foster said, pulling up a series of job postings that had appeared and disappeared from various employment websites. "According to these listings, they've interviewed dozens of candidates but never hired anyone. Very specific requirements: wilderness experience, emergency medical training, local mountain knowledge, and something called demonstrated moral character under pressure." Raymond read through the job descriptions with growing amazement. The salary ranges started at $75,000 and went up to $120,000, depending on experience. The benefits packages included health insurance, continuing education allowances, and housing assistance that could include on-site accommodation for families. Mr. Ruiz, Mrs. Foster said gently, I don't mean to pry, but is this about Friday night's rescue? Word traveled fast in mountain communities, and Raymond wasn't surprised that the librarian had connected the dots. Possibly, she wants to meet with me about the position. Mrs. Foster's expression grew thoughtful. You know, I've been wondering for months who could possibly meet all these requirements. Most people with extensive wilderness rescue experience don't have local mountain knowledge. Most people with local knowledge don't have formal emergency medical training. And moral character under pressure isn't exactly something you can teach or test for in a traditional interview. She pulled up the most recent job posting, dated just 3 weeks earlier. But someone who risks their own safety to save a stranger during a blizzard, someone who knows these mountains from years of construction work and has wilderness first aid certification, someone whose moral character has been demonstrated rather than just claimed? She smiled. I'd say Miss Smith has been looking for someone exactly like you. Raymond's next stop was Dave Martinez, who was finishing his morning shift at the resort's maintenance facility. Dave had worked at Silverpeak for 8 years and understood the operation's inner workings better than almost anyone.
Madeline Smith is a mystery, Dave said, leading Raymond through the staff areas of the resort that most guests never saw. But she's a fair mystery, if that makes sense. I've never met her personally, but every policy decision that comes down from management is designed to take care of the people who work here. They walked past employee break rooms that were better appointed than many people's homes, through equipment storage areas that were meticulously organized and fully stocked, past bulletin boards covered with announcements about educational opportunities, healthcare benefits, and family support programs. The mountain safety position has been her pet project for 2 years, Dave continued. She wants someone who can develop comprehensive emergency response protocols, train staff and guests in wilderness safety, and coordinate with local rescue services. But more than that, she wants someone who understands that people's lives are more important than liability concerns or budget constraints. What do you mean? Dave stopped at a window that overlooked the main slopes where early season skiers were taking advantage of the fresh snow from Friday's storm. Last year, we had a guest who suffered a heart attack on one of the intermediate trails. Standard protocol would have been to call for medical evacuation and wait for professional paramedics. But the shift supervisor that day was a guy named Tom Chen, Victoria's husband actually, who has EMT training. Tom made the call to start emergency treatment immediately instead of waiting for the official medical team. That seems like the right choice. It was. The guest survived because Tom didn't wait for permission to do what he knew was right. But technically, Tom violated resort policy by providing medical care outside his job description. Most management teams would have written him up or fired him to avoid liability issues. Dave smiled. Miss Smith gave Tom a commendation and changed the policy to encourage staff to act on their training and judgment rather than hide behind bureaucracy. The picture that emerged from Dave's stories was of an owner who prioritized substance over procedure, who trusted her employees to make moral decisions even when those decisions complicated legal or financial considerations. It was the kind of management philosophy that sounded too good to be true, except that Dave had 8 years of experience to back up his claims. Ray, I'm going to tell you something that might sound crazy, Dave said as they headed back toward the parking area. I think she's been looking for you specifically. Not you personally, but someone with your exact combination of skills and character. The job postings, the specific requirements, the emphasis on moral character, it's like she knew that the right person would eventually prove themselves through their actions rather than their resume. Raymond's final stop was the most difficult conversation of all. He called Patricia from his truck in the resort parking lot, knowing that she needed to hear about the opportunity from him rather than through Camila's excited second-grade interpretation of events. $90,000. Patricia's voice carried a mixture of skepticism and something that might have been hope. Raymond, that's more than twice what you made last year. I know it sounds impossible. It sounds too good to be true. What's the catch? Raymond looked out at the mountain slopes where he'd risked his life 3 days earlier for a stranger who turned out to be one of the wealthiest people in Colorado. I don't know yet. Maybe there isn't one. Patricia was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer than it had been in months. If this is real, Raymond, if this woman is offering you a legitimate opportunity because of what you did Friday night, Camila deserves to have a father who can provide for her properly. And maybe you deserve to have something good happen for once. As Raymond drove back to town to pick up Camila from school and prepare for the most important meeting of his life, he carried with him the weight of information that made the opportunity seem both more real and more impossible. Everything he'd learned suggested that Madeline Smith was exactly what she appeared to be, a wealthy, reclusive woman who'd been searching for someone with his precise qualifications and who'd found him through circumstances that seemed orchestrated by forces beyond anyone's control. The question that remained as he watched Camila emerge from school with her backpack and her infectious enthusiasm for whatever adventure came next was whether he was brave enough to believe that sometimes the universe really did reward people who were willing to risk everything for strangers in storms. One way or another, he was about to find out. The black sedan that arrived at exactly 1:30 p.m. was understated in the way that only truly expensive things could be. No flashy details, just perfect lines and the kind of quiet luxury that whispered rather than shouted. Raymond had spent the morning helping Camila choose an outfit for the occasion, finally settling on her navy blue dress with small white polka dots that made her look simultaneously sophisticated and 8 years old. "Remember," she told him seriously as they waited by the window, "Mrs. Rodriguez says that when you meet important people, you should look them in the eye and use your inside voice, and don't forget to say thank you." Now, as the sedan glided through Winter Haven's narrow streets toward the mountain road that led to Silverpeak Resort, Raymond found himself grateful for his daughter's wisdom about meeting important people. Camila sat beside him in the leather back seat, her small hands folded carefully in her lap, taking in every detail of their journey with the focused attention of someone who understood that this ride might change everything.
The driver, a quiet man named James who'd introduced himself with the kind of professional courtesy that suggested years of transporting people to life-changing meetings, took the winding mountain road with practiced ease. As they climbed toward the resort, the view through the windows transformed from the modest buildings of Winter Haven to pristine wilderness that seemed untouched by human presence, except for the perfectly maintained road they traveled. "Daddy," Camila whispered, pressing her nose against the window, "it's like driving into a fairy tale." She wasn't wrong. Silverpeak Resort revealed itself gradually through the pine trees, emerging like something from a dream of what mountain luxury should look like. The main lodge was constructed of native stone and weathered timber, managing to appear both massive and somehow organic, as if it had grown from the mountain itself rather than being built upon it. Smaller buildings scattered throughout the property followed the same architectural philosophy, creating a sense of village rather than resort. James guided the sedan up a private drive that curved past carefully maintained gardens and what appeared to be employee housing that looked more like vacation homes than staff quarters. Everything was designed with the same understated elegance as the car they rode in. Beautiful without being ostentatious, expensive without being wasteful. "Miss Smith is waiting for you in the private dining room. Mrs. Chen will meet you inside." The interior of the lodge continued the theme of elegant understatement. Massive stone fireplaces anchored seating areas filled with furniture that looked handcrafted and comfortable rather than simply impressive. Local artwork covered the walls, paintings and photographs that captured the mountain's changing seasons, sculptures carved from what appeared to be local wood and stone. Victoria Chen appeared within moments of their arrival, wearing a different expensive coat, but the same warm smile that had made their initial meeting feel like a conversation between friends rather than a business transaction. "Perfect timing," she said, kneeling to Camila's level with the natural ease of someone who genuinely enjoyed children. "Camila, Miss Smith is very excited to meet you. She asked me to tell you that she has a daughter too, though she's quite a bit older than you are." "How old?" Camila asked with the direct curiosity that made adults either love her immediately or find her slightly overwhelming. 17. Her name is Alexandra, and she's away at college right now, but Miss Smith thinks you two would get along wonderfully."
They were led through corridors that felt more like a private home than a business establishment, past windows that offered glimpses of snow-covered slopes and valleys that stretched toward distant peaks. Everything was designed to make guests feel welcomed rather than impressed, though the overall effect was undeniably impressive nonetheless. The private dining room was smaller than Raymond had expected, with a fireplace crackling warmly and a table set for 4 rather than the formal conference setup he'd been anticipating. Floor-to-ceiling windows provided a panoramic view of the mountain ranges that stretched to the horizon, creating the sense of dining suspended between earth and sky. Madeline Smith stood when they entered, and Raymond's first thought was that she looked nothing like he'd expected a billionaire resort owner to look like. She was tall and athletic, with graying brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and wearing jeans, hiking boots, and a fleece jacket that looked like they'd seen actual outdoor use. Her face showed the kind of weathering that came from spending time in mountain sun and wind, and her handshake was firm with calluses that suggested she knew what manual work felt like. "Mr. Ruiz," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that might have been European but was too faint to identify precisely. "I can't tell you how grateful I am for what you did Friday night." "Anyone would have done the same thing," Raymond replied, then immediately felt foolish for deflecting what was clearly meant to be genuine gratitude. "No," Madeline said firmly, "they wouldn't. And that's exactly why I wanted to meet with you." She turned to Camila with the same serious attention she'd given Raymond. "And you must be Camila. Your father tells me you're very interested in mountain rescue operations." Camila nodded solemnly. "I want to help save people when I grow up, like the rescue dogs in our puzzle." "That's a wonderful goal. Would you like to see some real rescue equipment while your father and I talk?" What followed was perhaps the most surreal hour of Raymond's life. While Camila was given a private tour of the resort's emergency response center by a patient staff member who seemed genuinely delighted to explain avalanche beacons and mountain communication systems to an 8-year-old, Raymond found himself in a conversation that felt like negotiating the terms of a completely different life. "The position I'm offering you doesn't exist anywhere else," Madeline explained over coffee that was probably the best he'd ever tasted. "I want to create a comprehensive mountain safety program that goes beyond standard liability protection. I want someone who can train our staff, educate our guests, coordinate with local emergency services, and serve as the final authority on safety decisions regardless of their impact on resort operations." "What do you mean by final authority?" "I mean that if you determine that conditions are unsafe for any activity, your decision stands. No questions, no appeals to management, no consideration of revenue impact. Guest safety and staff safety take precedence over everything else."
The salary discussion that followed felt like fantasy. $90,000 annually, with automatic cost of living increases and performance bonuses that could push the total significantly higher. Health insurance that covered not just basic medical care, but included dental, vision, and mental health services. Educational benefits that would cover Camila's college tuition at any school she could get into. "There's also housing," Madeline added, almost as an afterthought. "We have a 3-bedroom cabin about half a mile from the main lodge. It comes with the position if you're interested." "A cabin?" "Private, fully furnished, mountain views. Camila would have her own room, and you'd have office space for program development. There's also access to all resort amenities, ski passes, dining, recreational activities." Raymond felt his carefully maintained skepticism beginning to crumble under the weight of generosity that seemed too comprehensive to be anything but genuine. "Miss Smith, I have to ask, why me? You could hire someone with advanced degrees, professional rescue experience, management training." Madeline was quiet for a moment, looking out at the mountains where she'd nearly died 3 days earlier. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that suggested she'd been thinking about this question for longer than just the weekend. 3 years ago, I inherited this resort and a fortune that I'd done nothing to earn. I've spent those 3 years trying to figure out how to use both responsibly. The mountain safety program isn't just about protecting guests and staff. It's about finding someone who understands that some things matter more than money." She turned back to him, and Raymond saw something in her expression that looked like relief. Friday night, when most people would have stayed safely indoors, you risked your life for a stranger. That's not something you can teach or test for. That's character, and character is what I've been looking for. When Camila returned an hour later, bubbling with excitement about rescue sleds and emergency communication protocols, Raymond realized that he'd already made his decision. Not because of the money or the benefits or even the opportunity to provide Camila with everything she deserved, but because for the first time in years, someone was asking him to be exactly who he already was, a man who showed up when people needed help, regardless of the personal cost. "I accept," he said, and watched as both Madeline's and Camila's faces broke into smiles that suggested he'd just made the best decision of his life. 6 weeks later, Raymond stood in the command center of Silverpeak Resort's newly established mountain safety operations, watching snow conditions data scroll across 3 large monitors while coordinating with the National Weather Service about an incoming storm system. The transformation from construction worker to director of mountain safety had happened with a speed that still sometimes left him breathless. But the cabin that was now home felt more permanent and secure than anywhere he and Camila had lived since her mother's death. The cabin itself had exceeded every expectation Madeline's modest description had created. 3 bedrooms meant Camila had her own space for the first time in 2 years, plus a guest room for the sleepovers she'd started having with other resort staff children. The kitchen was large enough for actual cooking, rather than the careful rationing of space they'd mastered in their studio apartment. Most importantly, the walls were thick enough that Camila's occasional asthma episodes in the middle of the night didn't wake the neighbors, because there were no neighbors close enough to wake. "Dad, are you coming to dinner?" Camila's voice carried from the main room, where she was setting the table with the methodical precision of someone who took her domestic responsibilities seriously. At 8 years old, she'd developed opinions about proper napkin placement and appropriate dinner conversation topics that would have impressed finishing school instructors. "2 minutes, mija," Raymond called back, finishing his review of the avalanche risk assessment that would determine tomorrow's slope accessibility. The work had proven to be everything Madeline had promised, and more challenging than he'd anticipated. Developing safety protocols from scratch meant balancing guest experience with risk management, coordinating with local emergency services, and training resort staff in procedures that could mean the difference between life and death in emergency situations. But the satisfaction was unlike anything he'd experienced in construction work. When a family from Texas thanked him for the wilderness safety orientation that helped them handle their teenager's altitude sickness properly, or when a staff member successfully used the emergency communication procedures he'd developed to coordinate a routine medical evacuation, Raymond felt the deep contentment that came from work that mattered beyond a paycheck. The evening routine they'd established in their new home had become one of Raymond's favorite parts of each day. Dinner together at the table by the window that looked out over the valley, Camila sharing stories from her new school while he told her about the day's safety challenges. Her asthma had improved dramatically since they'd moved to the cleaner mountain air and the reduced stress of financial security. And watching her breathe easily through animated conversations about her friends and her classes felt like a daily miracle. "Mrs. Patterson says I'm reading at a 5th grade level," Camila announced, twirling her spaghetti with the careful concentration of someone who'd recently mastered the technique. "She thinks I should apply for the advanced reading program next year." "That's wonderful. Do you want to be in the advanced program?" Camila considered this with the seriousness she brought to all major life decisions. "I think so, but Marcus Chen is in advanced reading, and he's kind of annoying. He always raises his hand even when he doesn't know the answer." Marcus was the 10-year-old son of Victoria and Tom Chen, and he'd become something like a big brother to Camila over the past month. Their family lived in one of the other staff housing units, and the children had formed the kind of instant friendship that made their parents grateful for the social opportunities that came with resort community living. "Maybe Marcus raises his hand because he's excited about learning, even when he's not sure about the answer," Raymond suggested. "Sometimes it's okay to be wrong if you're trying to figure things out." That's what Alexandra said too. Alexandra was Madeline's 17-year-old daughter, home from boarding school for winter break and immediately fascinated by Camila's combination of intelligence and earnestness. The friendship that had developed between the 8-year-old and the teenager was one of the unexpected gifts of their new life, giving Camila access to a kind of sophisticated mentorship that was already expanding her ideas about what she might accomplish. "Are you still planning to go skiing with her tomorrow?" If the conditions are safe, Camila said, unconsciously echoing the language she heard from her father's work every day. Alexandra says I'm a natural, but I think she's just being nice because she likes teaching people things. The skiing lessons were another development that felt like something from someone else's life. Free access to the slopes, professional instruction, equipment provided by the resort, Camila was developing skills that would have been impossible dreams just 2 months earlier. But more than the material benefits, she was developing confidence and physical competence that carried over into every aspect of her life. Raymond's phone buzzed with a text from Madeline. Emergency response drill went perfectly today. Staff response time improved by 40% since you started the training program. Excellent work. The professional relationship that had developed between them was unlike anything from his construction experience. Madeline treated his expertise with genuine respect, supporting his decisions even when they cost the resort revenue. When he'd recommended closing the advanced slopes during marginal conditions last week, potentially losing thousands of dollars in lift ticket sales, she'd backed his judgment without question and used the incident as a teaching moment about prioritizing safety over profit. "Dad, why are you smiling at your phone?" Camila asked, with the sharp observational skills that made hiding anything from her nearly impossible. "Miss Smith was telling me that the emergency training went well today." "She's really nice," Camila said. "When she came to my school presentation about mountain safety, she asked the best questions. Not like when adults ask questions just to be polite, but like she really wanted to know what I thought about avalanche rescue techniques." The school presentation had been Camila's idea, developed after weeks of absorbing information from her father's work and her friendship with Alexandra. She'd put together a 15-minute talk about wilderness safety that demonstrated understanding that impressed both her teacher and the parent volunteers who attended. Watching his 8-year-old daughter confidently explain the importance of emergency preparedness to a room full of adults had been one of the proudest moments of Raymond's life. After dinner, they settled into their new evening routine on the couch that faced the large window overlooking the valley. Camila worked on homework that had become significantly more challenging since her transfer to Winter Haven Elementary's accelerated program, while Raymond reviewed safety protocols and incident reports from other mountain resorts that helped him refine Silverpeak's procedures. "Dad," Camila said, looking up from her math worksheet, "do you think we'll stay here forever?" The question hit Raymond with unexpected force, partly because he'd been wondering the same thing, and partly because he realized how much he wanted the answer to be yes. 6 weeks wasn't long enough to call anywhere home permanently, but it was long enough to understand what home could feel like when it included financial security, meaningful work, and a community that valued both him and his daughter. "I don't know about forever," he said carefully, "but I hope we'll stay here for a long time. Do you like it here?" "I love it here," Camila said, with the simple certainty that made her opinions feel like fundamental truths. "I love our house, and I love my school, and I love that you're happy when you come home from work instead of tired and worried." The observation was more perceptive than Raymond had realized his daughter was capable of making, and it forced him to acknowledge how much their circumstances had changed beyond just the material improvements. He was sleeping better, laughing more, and approaching each day with anticipation rather than the grim determination that had characterized their previous existence. "I love it here too, Mija," he said, pulling her close for the kind of spontaneous hug that had become more frequent as their stress levels decreased. "And I think we're exactly where we're supposed to be." As they sat together watching snow begin to fall outside their window, Raymond reflected on the series of decisions and circumstances that had brought them from their cramped studio apartment to this moment of complete contentment. The rescue that had seemed like a single act of moral necessity had become the foundation for a life that exceeded his most optimistic dreams about what was possible for them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The incoming storm system required constant monitoring. Staff training sessions needed preparation, and coordination with local emergency services demanded ongoing attention. But tonight, watching Camila work on homework that challenged her intellect while planning skiing adventures that developed her confidence, Raymond felt the deep satisfaction that came from knowing that sometimes taking risks for strangers really does lead to rewards beyond anything you could have imagined when you made the decision to help. The only shadow in their newfound happiness was so small that Raymond barely acknowledged it to himself. The occasional moment when Madeline's expression suggested she was working through problems more complex than resort management, and the sense that their benefactor carried burdens that success and wealth hadn't been able to resolve. But those concerns felt distant compared to the immediate reality of Camila's laughter and the promise of another day in a life that finally felt like the one they deserved. The discovery happened by accident, which seemed fitting for something that would shatter every assumption Raymond had built about their new life. He'd been looking for emergency contact information in Madeline's office filing cabinet. She was away for what she'd called routine medical appointments in Denver, and a guest injury required immediate coordination with outside medical facilities. Victoria had given him access to the administrative files, apologizing for the invasion of privacy while emphasizing that guest safety took precedent over normal boundaries. Raymond had been careful to look only for what he needed, respecting the trust that had been placed in him. But when the medical file folder slipped from his hands, scattering papers across Madeline's pristine office floor, he found himself staring at documents that transformed everything he thought he understood about why he was here. Colorado Neurological Associates. Patient, Madeline Catherine Smith. Diagnosis, early onset Huntington's disease, confirmed genetic testing. Estimated progression timeline, 8 to 12 years from symptom onset. Current status, stage 2, mild cognitive symptoms, motor function decline expected within 18 to 24 months. Raymond sank into Madeline's desk chair, his hands shaking as he read through medical reports that painted a picture of a woman whose generosity hadn't been born from wealth and privilege, but from the desperate urgency of someone who knew her time was running out. The dates on the documents told the story with brutal clarity. First symptoms had appeared 14 months ago. The job postings for Mountain Safety Director had begun exactly 13 months ago. Everything clicked into place with horrible precision. The specific requirements for demonstrated moral character under pressure, the emphasis on someone who could work independently and make critical decisions without supervision, the comprehensive benefits package that extended to family members. Madeline hadn't been looking for an employee, she'd been looking for a successor, someone who could protect Silverpeak Resort and its community when she could no longer do it herself. The medication schedule tucked between the medical reports showed a progression of treatments designed to slow cognitive decline and manage the involuntary movements that would eventually make normal function impossible. Notes in Madeline's careful handwriting documented episodes of confusion, memory lapses, and the tremor in her left hand that she'd been hiding with increasing difficulty. But it was the letter addressed to future management that made Raymond's vision blur with tears and fury in equal measure. Madeline had written detailed instructions for maintaining the resort's community-focused policies, protecting employee benefits, and ensuring that local families wouldn't be displaced by corporate restructuring when she could no longer make decisions. At the bottom, in handwriting that showed the slight shakiness he now understood, she'd written, "If Raymond Ruiz is reading this, I hope he understands that everything I've done has been to protect the people and place I love most. I pray he'll forgive the deception and help me finish what we started." "Mr. Ruiz?" Victoria's voice from the doorway made him jump. She took in the scattered papers, his pale face, and the medical documents in his hands, and her expression shifted from surprise to something that looked like relief. "You weren't supposed to find out this way. You knew." It wasn't a question. Victoria closed the office door behind her and sat down across from the desk with the weary posture of someone who'd been carrying a secret too heavy for one person to bear. "I've known for over a year." Madeline needed someone she could trust to help manage things as her condition progresses. "She's dying." "She's living," Victoria corrected gently, "living with the knowledge that she has maybe 8 years before the disease takes her ability to think, to move, to be herself. She spent the last year arranging her affairs to protect everyone she cares about, including you and Camila." Raymond set the medical reports on the desk with hands that had steadied into something that felt like controlled anger. "She manipulated me. She used the rescue as an excuse to hire someone she'd already decided she needed." She hired someone whose character was tested under circumstances that can't be faked, Victoria said firmly. Do you think she planned the avalanche? Do you think she orchestrated a life-threatening situation just to see how you'd respond? She could have told me the truth. Could she? Would you have taken the job if you'd known you were being hired to eventually replace a woman with a progressive neurological disease? Would you have been able to look at her the same way, treat her with the same respect, if you'd known she was losing her mind piece by piece? The questions hung in the air like accusations, and Raymund realized that Victoria was probably right. His pride, his protective instincts toward Camila, his own fears about being used, all of it would have made accepting help from a dying woman feel like charity rather than opportunity. "What happens now?" he asked. Victoria pulled out a folder from her briefcase, spreading documents across the desk with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been preparing for this conversation for months. "Now we talk about the real job you were hired to do. Madeline has 18 months, maybe 2 years, before her symptoms become impossible to hide. During that time, she wants to transition resort management to people she trusts, primarily you for safety and community oversight, me for daily operations, Tom for facilities management." The organizational chart she showed him revealed a succession plan that had been developed with the detail and foresight of someone who understood that institutional knowledge couldn't be replaced quickly. Every aspect of resort operations had been documented, key personnel identified and trained, financial structures established to ensure continuity regardless of external pressures. "She's essentially giving you the resort," Victoria continued. "Not legally, Alexandra will inherit when she turns 25, but practically, your decisions about safety and community welfare will carry the same authority as owner decisions. The salary increase to $150,000 reflects your expanded responsibilities." Raymund stared at numbers that represented more money than he dreamed of making in his lifetime, offered as compensation for shouldering responsibilities he'd never imagined having to bear. What about Alexandra? What does she know? Everything. Madeline told her about the diagnosis 6 months ago. Alexandra supports every aspect of the transition plan, including your role in it. Victoria's expression softened. "She's 17, Mr. Ruiz. She'll finish college and inherit a resort that she's not ready to manage alone. Having someone she trusts in charge of operations isn't just practical, it's the only way she can have a normal young adulthood while learning to handle the responsibilities that will eventually be hers." The office fell quiet except for the sound of wind against the windows and the distant noise of resort operations continuing normally, while Raymund's understanding of his place in the world reorganized itself around information that made him feel simultaneously honored and betrayed. "I need to think about this," he said finally. "Of course, but Mr. Ruiz, before you make any decisions, consider this. Everything Madeline has done, hiring you, trusting you with expanded authority, arranging for your family's security, has been about more than just ensuring smooth resort operations. She's dying, and she wanted to spend her remaining healthy time doing something meaningful. Saving your life and Camilla's future was meaningful to her." Victoria gathered the documents, leaving only the original medical file on the desk. "She'll be back from Denver tomorrow. She doesn't know that you know, but I think she'll be relieved when you confront her about it. Keeping secrets takes energy that she needs for other things." After Victoria left, Raymund sat alone in Madeline's office, looking out at the mountain slopes where he'd pulled her from an avalanche 8 weeks earlier. The rescue that had seemed like a single moment of moral clarity had become the foundation for a complex relationship built on mutual need and carefully managed deception. The question now was whether love and trust could survive the revelation that neither of them had been entirely honest about what they needed from each other. That evening, as he helped Camila with homework that included a report about community helpers, Raymund found himself wondering how to explain to an 8-year-old that the woman who'd saved their lives was dying, and that sometimes the most generous acts came from people who were running out of time to be generous. The conversation would have to wait until after he confronted Madeline, but he already knew that Camila would understand better than he had, that love wasn't diminished by hidden motivations, and that sometimes the greatest gifts came from people who had everything to lose and chose to give anyway.
The crisis arrived on a Thursday morning in early March, delivered by a man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd stepped directly from a corporate boardroom into the mountain wilderness without bothering to change clothes. Raymund first saw him through the command center windows, standing near the main lodge entrance with two other people who carried themselves with the predatory confidence of lawyers who specialized in hostile takeovers. "Mr. Ruiz, we have a problem." Victoria's voice through the intercom carried a tension that immediately put Raymund on alert. In the 3 weeks since he'd discovered Madeline's diagnosis, he'd learned to read the subtle signs of stress in people who were trying to manage a deteriorating situation while maintaining normal operations. The meeting that followed took place in the resort's main conference room, with Madeline presiding over what felt more like a tribunal than a business discussion. She sat at the head of the table with the carefully controlled posture of someone who was using significant energy to appear normal, her left hand resting in her lap where the tremor wouldn't be visible to unfriendly observers. The man in the expensive suit introduced himself as Richard Blackstone, representing Pinnacle Resort Holdings, a corporation that specialized in acquiring underperforming mountain properties and converting them into maximally profitable leisure destinations. His companions were a lawyer who spoke in carefully measured legal phrases and a financial analyst who seemed to view everything in terms of revenue optimization. "Miss Smith," Blackstone began, spreading documents across the conference table with theatrical precision. "We've been monitoring Silverpeak Resort's operations for the past 6 months, and we believe we can offer you a very generous acquisition package." The offer was staggering: $400 million for complete ownership of the resort and all associated properties. It was enough money to secure Madeline's medical care for life and leave Alexandra one of the wealthiest young women in Colorado. It was also, Raymund realized as he read through the acquisition terms, a complete dismantling of everything that made Silverpeak Resort special. "Our projections show that current profit margins are significantly below industry standards," the financial analyst explained, pulling up charts that reduced the resort's community-focused policies to inefficient operational expenses. Staff housing, educational benefits, local hiring preferences, and conservative safety protocols all represent opportunities for substantial cost reduction. What they were describing wasn't resort management. It was asset stripping disguised as business optimization. Under Pinnacle's ownership, the employee housing would be converted to premium guest accommodations. Local hiring would be replaced with seasonal workers imported from other states at lower wages. The mountain safety program that Raymund had spent months developing would be outsourced to the cheapest available contractor. Furthermore, the lawyer added, "We understand that there have been concerns about management continuity and decision-making capacity within the current ownership structure. Our acquisition would resolve any potential complications related to succession planning." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Raymund felt Madeline's careful composure crack slightly, and he realized that Pinnacle didn't just know about her medical condition. They were using it as leverage to pressure her into a sale that would destroy everything she'd worked to protect. "How did you learn about Miss Smith's private medical information?" Raymund asked, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that made the lawyer's expression shift from confidence to wariness. "Furthermore," the lawyer added, "we're simply responding to market opportunities and operational inefficiencies that suggest a need for professional management restructuring." Victoria leaned forward with the expression of someone who'd reached the end of her patience with corporate euphemisms. "What you're describing isn't restructuring, it's destructuring. You want to fire half the staff, eliminate community programs, and turn a resort that serves its local community into a playground for people who can afford $1,000 a night hotel rooms. We want to maximize asset value and operational efficiency," the financial analyst corrected. "Emotional attachments to inefficient policies don't create sustainable business models." Madeline had been quiet throughout the presentation, but now she spoke with the kind of controlled fury that Raymund had never heard from her before. "Gentlemen, Silverpeak Resort has been profitable every year for the past decade while maintaining the policies you consider inefficient. Our staff retention rates are the highest in the industry.
Our guest satisfaction scores exceed national averages. We operate a successful business that also happens to care about its community. But not optimally successful, Blackstone pressed. And given the uncertainties surrounding future management capabilities, wouldn't it be more responsible to ensure continuity through professional corporate oversight? The threat was barely veiled. Accept the buyout offer or face a public challenge to Madeline's competency that would drag her medical condition into legal proceedings designed to force a sale anyway. Raymund understood that Pinnacle had done their research carefully, timing their approach to exploit Madeline's vulnerability while making resistance seem futile. "We'll need time to consider your proposal," Madeline said finally, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands that had become more pronounced as the meeting progressed. "Of course, but I should mention that this offer has a limited window. Market conditions change rapidly, and acquisition opportunities require decisive action." Blackstone gathered his documents with the satisfied air of someone who believed he'd already won. "We'll need a response within 2 weeks." After the Pinnacle representatives left, the conference room fell into the kind of silence that followed natural disasters, the stunned quiet of people trying to process destruction that had arrived without warning. Madeline sat with her head in her hands, the careful composure she'd maintained during the meeting finally cracking under the weight of a choice that felt like choosing between her own future and the community she'd spent years protecting. "They can't force you to sell," Raymund said, though even as he spoke the words, he wasn't sure they were true. "They can if they can prove I'm not competent to make business decisions," Madeline replied quietly. "And my medical condition gives them exactly the ammunition they need for a competency challenge." Victoria pulled out her phone, already researching legal options with the grim efficiency of someone who understood that they were in a fight for survival. "We need corporate lawyers, good ones, and we need to document every aspect of the resort's financial success and operational efficiency." "They'll argue that my condition affects my judgment," Madeline continued, her voice growing stronger as she worked through the implications. "They'll claim that emotional decision-making about staff welfare and community programs proves cognitive impairment. In a legal proceeding, every generous policy becomes evidence of declining mental capacity." Raymund felt a cold fury building in his chest as he understood the full scope of what Pinnacle was attempting. They weren't just trying to buy a resort. They were using a woman's terminal illness as a weapon to force her to destroy everything she cared about. The cruelty was breathtaking in its calculated precision. "What if you weren't making the decisions?" he asked suddenly. "What if you transferred operational authority to people who aren't affected by medical concerns?" Madeline looked up at him with something that might have been hope. "You mean accelerate the succession plan?" "I mean make it official. Transfer decision-making authority to the management team you've already chosen. Make the medical condition irrelevant to business operations." Victoria was already pulling up legal documents on her tablet, her expression brightening as she recognized the strategy. "We can execute the succession plan immediately. Formal transfer of operational authority to you, Tom, and me, with Madeline retaining ownership but not day-to-day management responsibilities." Would that work legally? It should. If Madeline isn't making business decisions, her medical condition can't be used to challenge those decisions. And if the resort continues to operate successfully under the new management structure, Pinnacle loses their argument about incompetent leadership. As they spent the rest of the day working through legal details and operational transitions, Raymund found himself thinking about the conversation he would need to have with Camila that evening. Their perfect life at Silverpeak Resort was under attack by people who see communities as inefficiencies and human welfare as obstacles to profit maximization. The fight ahead would test everything they'd built together, but it would also prove whether love and determination could overcome the kind of institutional cruelty that turned terminal illness into a corporate opportunity. That night, as he tucked Camila into bed in the cabin that might not be theirs much longer, Raymund promised himself that whatever happened in the coming battle, he would not let Pinnacle Resort Holdings destroy the community that had given his family hope. Some things were worth fighting for, even when the fight seemed impossible to win. The employee meeting that would determine Silverpeak Resort's future took place in the main lodge's largest conference room on a Friday evening, with every member of the resort's year-round staff crowding into chairs arranged in concentric circles that made the gathering feel more like a town hall than a corporate briefing. Raymond stood at the front of the room beside Madeline, Victoria, and Tom Chen, looking out at faces that represented not just employees, but neighbors, friends, and the foundation of a community that had taken him and Camila in when they had nowhere else to go. Madeline had insisted on telling the staff about Pinnacle's acquisition offer herself, despite the visible tremor in her hands and the slight slur in her speech that had become more pronounced under stress. She stood with the quiet dignity of someone who decided that honesty was the only tool she had left to fight with. "I need to tell you something that I should have shared months ago," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the room despite its new fragility. "I have Huntington's disease. It's a progressive neurological condition that will eventually affect my ability to think clearly and make good decisions. I've been working with Victoria, Tom, and Raymond to create a transition plan that would protect all of you and maintain the values that make Silverpeak special." The silence that followed was heavy with shock, sadness, and something that looked like understanding. These were people who'd worked alongside Madeline for years, who'd noticed the subtle changes in her behavior and attributed them to stress or fatigue rather than the early stages of a terminal illness. "Pinnacle Resort Holdings wants to buy us out," she continued. "They're offering enough money to solve every financial concern any of us could ever have, but they also want to eliminate employee housing, cut benefits, reduce staff, and turn Silverpeak into the kind of place that serves wealthy tourists while ignoring the community that makes it possible." Maria Santos, the head of housekeeping who'd worked at the resort for 15 years, raised her hand with the serious expression of someone asking a question that mattered to more than just herself. "What happens to our families if they take over?" Victoria stepped forward to answer, her voice steady but tinged with the anger that had been building since Pinnacle's visit. "Based on their operational plans, approximately 60% of current staff would be terminated within 6 months. Employee housing would be converted to premium guest accommodations. Healthcare benefits would be eliminated. Local hiring preferences would be replaced with seasonal workers imported from other states at lower wages." The room erupted in murmurs of distress and outrage as people processed what Victoria's clinical language meant in practical terms. Families forced to move away from the valley because affordable housing had been eliminated. Children pulled out of local schools because their parents no longer had jobs. A community scattered because corporate efficiency demanded that human connections be treated as expendable overhead. "But we have options," Raymond said, raising his voice enough to cut through the growing anxiety. "Madeline has been working on a succession plan that would transfer operational authority to a management team committed to maintaining our current policies and protecting everyone in this room." He outlined the legal strategy they developed over the past week: formal transfer of day-to-day decision-making to himself, Victoria, and Tom, with Madeline retaining ownership but stepping back from active management. It was a structure that would neutralize Pinnacle's arguments about incompetent leadership while preserving the community-focused policies that made Silverpeak unique. "The challenge," Tom Chen added, "is that we need to execute this transition immediately and demonstrate that the resort continues to operate successfully under new management. We need everyone in this room to help us prove that Silverpeak doesn't need corporate restructuring to be profitable." What happened next was something that none of them had anticipated. James Morrison, the resort's head of maintenance who'd been quietly listening from the back of the room, stood up with the measured authority of someone who'd been thinking about community leadership longer than anyone realized. "I've worked mountain resorts for 25 years, he said, his weathered face serious as he looked around the room at his colleagues. "I've seen what happens when corporate chains take over local operations. They gut the staff, eliminate the benefits, and treat workers like interchangeable parts instead of human beings with families and lives." He paused, making eye contact with people throughout the room: housekeepers and ski instructors, kitchen staff and lift operators, groundskeepers and administrative assistants who'd built careers and lives around the stability that Silverpeak provided. Madeline gave us something that most workers never get, a boss who cares more about our welfare than her profit margins. Now she's asking us to help her protect that, even though she's facing something that would make most people just take the money and run. James's voice grew stronger as he spoke. I say we fight for what we have. I say we prove that people working together can beat corporations that see us as numbers on a spreadsheet.
The applause that followed was spontaneous and sustained, but it was what came after the applause that transformed a staff meeting into a community mobilization. Carmen Rodriguez from the kitchen volunteered to coordinate with local suppliers to ensure food costs remained competitive. The ski instruction team offered to develop new programs that would attract guests while requiring minimal additional investment. Administrative staff proposed documentation systems that would prove the resort's profitability and operational efficiency to any legal challenges. Alexandra Smith, home from boarding school for spring break, had been sitting quietly in the back of the room beside Camila and the other resort children who'd been invited to witness their community defending itself. Now she stood with the poise of someone who'd inherited her mother's sense of moral responsibility along with her business acumen. "I'm 17, she said, her clear voice cutting through the room's excited planning. "I won't inherit legal control of the resort for another 8 years, but I want everyone in this room to know that when I do, I intend to continue exactly what my mother started. The policies that Pinnacle wants to eliminate, employee benefits, community investment, local hiring, those aren't inefficiencies to be corrected. They're the foundation of what makes Silverpeak worth inheriting." She looked directly at Raymund, and he saw in her expression the same determination that had driven Madeline to risk everything for the people she cared about. "Mr. Ruiz, my mother chose you to protect this place and these people. I'm asking you to help me learn how to do the same thing." The meeting that had begun with fear and uncertainty ended with something that felt like a declaration of war against corporate indifference. As people filed out of the conference room, organizing themselves into committees and action groups with the efficiency of a community that had decided to fight for its survival, Raymund found himself thinking about the Avalanche rescue that had started everything. That night, he'd pulled one person from under tons of snow and debris. Tonight, an entire community was pulling itself out from under the threat of corporate destruction. The techniques were different, but the principle was the same. When people were in danger, you didn't wait for permission or professional help. You used whatever tools you had, and you dug until everyone was safe. As he walked home to the cabin with Camila beside him, chattering excitedly about the grown-up meeting where everyone had decided to fight the bad business people, Raymund realized that the real test of his character wasn't going to be pulling strangers from avalanches. It was going to be leading a community through a different kind of storm, one where the stakes were measured not in individual lives, but in the survival of everything that made life worth living. The war for Silverpeak Resort's soul was about to begin, and Raymund Ruiz, former construction worker, single father, and reluctant hero, was going to help lead it. The legal battle that determined Silverpeak Resort's future played out over 9 days in a Denver courtroom that felt more like a corporate boardroom than a place where justice was supposed to prevail. Raymund sat at the defendant's table, wearing his best suit, purchased specifically for the occasion with money that would have gone toward Camila's summer camp, and tried to project the kind of confidence that he'd learned from watching Madeline navigate impossible situations with grace under pressure. Pinnacle Resort Holdings had moved faster than anyone anticipated, filing a petition for judicial review of Madeline's business decisions within hours of the resort staff's mobilization meeting. Their legal team painted a picture of a woman whose terminal illness had compromised her judgment to such an extent that she was essentially giving away a $400 million asset to unqualified employees who lacked the experience to manage a complex hospitality operation. "Your Honor," Richard Blackstone's lead attorney argued on the trial's third day, Ms. Smith's recent decision to transfer operational authority to individuals with no formal business education represents exactly the kind of impaired judgment that Huntington's disease creates in its early stages. Mr. Ruiz, while undoubtedly well-intentioned, has no college degree, no hospitality management experience, and no track record of overseeing operations with annual revenues exceeding $30 million. The attack was personal and professional, designed to make Raymund feel like an imposter who'd been placed in a position far beyond his capabilities. But 3 months of managing mountain safety operations had taught him that leadership wasn't about credentials. It was about making decisions that protected people even when those decisions cost money or complicated procedures. Mr. Ruiz, the opposing attorney continued during cross-examination, isn't it true that your primary qualification for this position is that Miss Smith felt grateful to you for saving her life during an avalanche rescue? Raymund looked out at the courtroom gallery where Camila sat beside Victoria in the front row, her 8-year-old face serious with the concentration of someone trying to understand why adults were arguing about whether her father was good enough to do a job he was already doing successfully. My primary qualification, Raymund said carefully, is that I understand what it means to be responsible for other people's safety. When you're buried under 8 feet of snow, your college degree doesn't matter. What matters is whether the person trying to help you will risk their own safety to dig you out. The Silverpeak legal team had spent weeks preparing for this moment, gathering documentation that told the story of a resort that had thrived under policies that prioritized community welfare alongside profit margins. Financial records showed consistent profitability despite, or perhaps because of, the generous employee benefits that Pinnacle considered inefficient. Guest satisfaction surveys revealed loyalty rates that exceeded industry standards, driven by staff who felt valued and invested in their work.
But the most powerful testimony came from people who had no financial stake in the outcome. Dr. Sarah Kim, the neurologist who diagnosed Madeline's condition, explained that early-stage Huntington's disease typically didn't affect executive function or business judgment. If anything, she testified, many patients experienced a period of enhanced focus and determination as they worked to accomplish important goals before their symptoms progressed. Ms. Smith's decision to establish a succession plan while she's still cognitively intact represents exactly the kind of responsible long-term planning that we encourage in patients with progressive neurological conditions, Dr. Kim told the court. Far from indicating impaired judgment, these actions demonstrate exceptional foresight and moral clarity. The breakthrough came on the trial's 7th day, when Alexandra Smith took the witness stand with the composed authority of someone who'd inherited her mother's steel spine along with her business empire. At 17, she was technically a minor, but her testimony carried the weight of someone who understood exactly what was at stake for the community she'd grown up loving. Pinnacle keeps talking about maximizing asset value, she said, looking directly at Richard Blackstone as she spoke. But they're missing the point. Silverpeak Resort isn't just a business, it's a community. The employee housing they want to eliminate isn't inefficient overhead, it's what allows families like the Chens and the Morrisons to raise their children in a place where they can afford to live. She pulled out a folder of documents that her legal team had prepared, spreading financial projections across the witness table with the confidence of someone who'd been studying business principles since middle school. Under Mr. Ruiz's management, mountain safety incidents have decreased by 60%, while guest satisfaction scores have increased to the highest levels in the resort's history. Employee turnover has dropped to virtually zero, which saves approximately $200,000 annually in recruitment and training costs. These aren't the results of incompetent management, they're the results of management that understands what actually creates value in hospitality operations. But it was what happened outside the courtroom that ultimately decided the case. Local news coverage of the trial had attracted attention from tourism industry publications, environmental groups, and labor organizations who saw Silverpeak's community-focused policies as a model for sustainable mountain development.
Letters of support poured in from guests who'd been visiting the resort for decades, former employees who'd built careers elsewhere but remembered the values they'd learned at Silverpeak, and business leaders who understood that long-term profitability required more than short-term cost-cutting. The decisive moment came when Colorado's Lieutenant Governor, Rebecca Martinez, submitted a formal statement supporting Silverpeak's current management structure. She described the resort as a showcase for how responsible business practices can create economic prosperity while strengthening mountain communities, and noted that the state had been studying Silverpeak's employee benefit programs as a model for legislation encouraging sustainable tourism development. On the trial's final day, Judge Patricia Hawkins delivered a ruling that felt like vindication for everyone who'd believed that community values and business success weren't mutually exclusive. She rejected Pinnacle's petition for judicial review, finding that Madeline's succession planning represented sound business judgment exercised by someone with full cognitive capacity, and that the resort's financial performance under its current policies provided no evidence of management incompetence. Furthermore, Judge Hawkins continued, "This court finds that the operational transition executed by Silverpeak Resort demonstrates exactly the kind of responsible leadership development that should be encouraged in family-owned businesses facing succession challenges. Mr. Ruiz and his management team have proven their competence through results, not credentials." The celebration that followed felt like a community festival rather than a legal victory. Outside the courthouse, Raymund found himself surrounded by resort employees who'd driven down from Winter Haven to witness the verdict, local business owners who'd been following the case through media coverage, and advocacy groups who saw the ruling as a precedent for protecting worker-friendly policies against corporate pressure. But the moment that mattered most came when Camila broke away from Victoria's supervision and launched herself into his arms with the force of someone who'd been worried about outcomes she was too young to fully understand. "Did we win, Daddy?" she asked, her face bright with the kind of relief that children felt when adult problems were finally resolved in ways that preserved their sense of security. "We won, Mija," Raymund said, holding her close while looking over her head at Madeline, who was accepting congratulations from the legal team with tears streaming down her face. "We all won." As they prepared for the drive back to Winter Haven and the mountain community that had fought so hard to protect itself, Raymund realized that the real victory wasn't the legal ruling or the financial security or even the preservation of jobs and benefits. The real victory was the proof that when people were willing to risk everything for each other, they could overcome forces that seemed impossibly powerful. Sometimes saving one person from an avalanche really could lead to saving an entire community from destruction. Sometimes courage was contagious, and sometimes the most important battles were won by ordinary people who refused to accept that ordinary people couldn't win them. 1 year later, Raymund stood on the deck of the Mountain Safety Command Center watching the first snowfall of the season dust the peaks of Silverpeak Resort with the promise of another winter that would test everything they'd built together. The view from his office hadn't changed, but everything else about his life had transformed in ways that still sometimes left him breathless with gratitude and responsibility in equal measure.
The resort below him thrived with a vitality that had become a model for sustainable mountain tourism throughout Colorado. The employee housing that Pinnacle had wanted to eliminate now served as headquarters for a workforce development program that brought young people from across the region to learn hospitality management while earning living wages and building careers in communities they could afford to call home. The comprehensive benefits package that had been dismissed as inefficient overhead had attracted national attention from business schools studying the connection between employee welfare and long-term profitability. Camila's voice drifted up from the main lodge, where she was leading a group of visiting elementary school students through the mountain safety education program she'd helped design. At 9 years old, she'd developed into a confident public speaker who could explain avalanche rescue techniques with the authority of someone who'd grown up surrounded by people who risked their lives to keep others safe. Her asthma had become a manageable condition rather than a constant source of worry, and her academic performance had earned her admission to a gifted program that challenged her intellect while allowing her to remain in the mountain community she'd come to love. "Mr. Ruiz, you have visitors." Victoria's voice through the intercom carried the warm amusement of someone who'd learned to appreciate unexpected developments in their carefully organized world. The visitors turned out to be a delegation from the Colorado Tourism Board, led by Director Amanda Yates, who'd been following Silverpeak's post-trial developments with the interest of someone who understood that the resort had become something unprecedented in the industry, a successful business that prioritized community welfare without sacrificing profitability. "We'd like to propose a partnership," Director Yates explained as they sat in the conference room that had hosted so many crucial conversations over the past year. "The state wants to use Silverpeak as a flagship example of sustainable mountain tourism. We're prepared to provide marketing support, infrastructure investment, and legislative backing for expansion of your employee development programs." The proposal was comprehensive and generous: state funding for a training institute that would prepare mountain workers throughout Colorado, tax incentives for businesses that adopted Silverpeak's community-focused policies, and designation as an official Colorado tourism heritage site that would attract visitors interested in experiencing authentic mountain culture rather than manufactured luxury. "There's also international interest," Director Yates continued, pulling out letters from tourism ministries in Switzerland, Austria, and New Zealand. "Mountain communities worldwide are dealing with the same pressures between economic development and cultural preservation. They want to study what you've accomplished here." Raymund looked out at the mountains where he'd pulled Madeline from an avalanche 13 months earlier, remembering the desperate man who'd been willing to risk everything for a stranger because he'd had nothing left to lose. The transformation from that moment to this one felt like evidence of forces beyond human planning, the mysterious mathematics of kindness and consequence that his daughter had tried to explain with 8-year-old wisdom about good things happening to people who did good things. "We're honored by the state's confidence," he said finally, "but any expansion would need to maintain our core commitment to the people who make this place special. Growth that displaces the community we're trying to protect wouldn't be sustainable regardless of how much external support it receives." The afternoon brought another kind of visitor, Patricia, his ex-wife, who'd been making regular trips to Silverpeak since the legal victory with what appeared to be genuine interest in understanding the life her daughter was building in the mountains. The custody tensions that had shadowed their relationship for years had dissolved into something approaching friendship as Patricia witnessed Camila's happiness and Raymond's transformation into the kind of father he'd always wanted to be. "She's thriving here," Patricia said as they watched Camila demonstrate proper avalanche beacon technique to a group of teenagers who hung on her every word with the attention that natural teachers shine. "I was wrong to think that providing for her meant taking her away from you. This is where she belongs." The conversation they had that afternoon resulted in a custody modification that gave Raymond primary residential custody, while ensuring Patricia remained actively involved in Camila's life. It was an arrangement built on mutual respect rather than legal positioning, focused on what was best for their daughter rather than what was fair to the adults who'd made complicated decisions under impossible circumstances. As evening settled over the mountain, Raymond found himself in the place where everything had started, the cabin that had become home in ways that transcended square footage or amenities. Camila sat at the kitchen table working on homework that included a creative writing assignment about personal heroes, while dinner simmered on the stove they'd finally learned to use for more than reheating takeout. "Who are you writing about?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her with the comfortable fatigue of someone who'd spent the day solving problems that mattered. "Mrs. Madeline," Camila said, holding up a paper covered with careful 9-year-old handwriting. "Mrs. Patterson said we should write about someone brave, and I think Mrs. Madeline is the bravest person I know." Madeline's condition had progressed over the past year, but slowly enough that she remained actively involved in resort operations, while gradually transferring more responsibilities to the management team she'd chosen. Her tremor was more pronounced now, and she sometimes struggled to find words during conversations, but her judgment remained sharp and her commitment to the community unwavering. The disease that had seemed like a tragic ending had become the catalyst for creating something larger and more lasting than any individual could accomplish alone. "Why do you think she's brave?" Raymund asked.
Camila considered the question with the seriousness she brought to all discussions about character and moral complexity. Because she knew she was going to get sick, but instead of being sad about it, she used her time to help other people. And she trusted you to take care of everything she loved, even though you were just a stranger who helped her in the snow. That evening, after Camilla had finished her homework and fallen asleep in the bedroom that had become hers in every way that mattered, Raymund sat by the window looking out at lights scattered throughout the valley. Houses where families lived and worked and built their lives around the understanding that some communities were worth protecting against forces that would reduce human connections to economic efficiency. His phone buzzed with a text message from Alexandra, now a freshman at Stanford University, studying sustainable business development with plans to return to Silverpeak after graduation. "Saw the tourism board announcement in the news. Mom says you're becoming famous for all the right reasons. Proud to be part of what you're building there." The message was followed by a photo from her dorm room, a framed picture of the entire Silver Peak community taken after the legal victory, showing dozens of people who'd learned that ordinary courage could overcome extraordinary challenges when it was multiplied by the power of people who cared about each other. As he prepared for bed in the home that had been built from the debris of Avalanche and the determination to believe that second chances were possible, Raymund reflected on the strange journey that had brought him from desperation to leadership. The rescue that had seemed like a single moment of moral necessity had become the foundation for a community that proved every day that business success and human compassion weren't opposing forces. They were complementary elements of the same commitment to creating something worthwhile. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that the values they'd fought to protect could continue to thrive in a world that often seemed determined to prioritize profit over people. But tonight, listening to his daughter's steady breathing in the next room and watching snow begin to fall on mountains that had become home, Raymund Ruiz felt the deep satisfaction that came from knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe really did reward people who were brave enough to dig strangers out of storms. And if that wasn't a perfect ending, it was something even better. A perfect beginning that would last exactly as long as there were people willing to risk everything for each other, one rescue at a time. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.